Hi, I'm Wade, and you stumbled upon the seam stream. Today, we're going to learn how to use our sewing machines. So go ahead and grab your new best friend, bring it to the table, and let's get started. So here we are. I have my machine here with me, and your machine could be the same, could be different. Doesn't matter though, because they're all pretty much the same. They all work the same, threading the same, or similar. I shouldn't say exactly the same. They're all a little different, but they all basically work the same way. We'll start off, and I'll show you some parts of the machine here. On the right side of your machine, you'll see a big dial here. This is your hand dial, and this can actually manually turn your needle. And whenever you turn this, you always want to turn this towards yourself. You want to turn it the way that the needle goes. You don't want to turn it backwards. You can manually stitch using this. There may be times you need to use this. And also, some machines, in order to wind your spool, you actually need to pull this portion out. This will pop out a little bit to unlock so you can wind the bobbin on your machine. So most machines that are digital have multiple designs of stitches. You may not have as many as I do. You may have a lot more than I do as well. Yours may or may not be digital, but you have your numbers here if it's digital, and if it's not digital, then you will have these stitches usually on a dial above it as well that corresponds with the number above your stitch. On my machine here, I have a switch here. This adjusts the speed of my stitching. So to the left is slower. To the right, I go faster. Oh my, that's awesome. And this is always set to your preference, but I like to leave it in the middle. Depending on what I'm stitching, I might go a little bit higher. I never recommend maximum unless you are really confident in what you're doing. Also, there are some buttons on mine. Yours might have these as buttons or might have these as dials. One of these raises and lowers the needle manually, just like that, so I can do a single stitch using my button. Or I can also do a back stitch by single pressing as well. And single pressing that or back stitching you might have a little button or a lever that you push down on. Either way, that will allow you to back stitch as well. So that's my machine there, and then we're going to take a look at the top of the machine now. So here on the top of the machine, you will see that we have a spool pin. Mine is a vertical spool pin. Some machines also have a horizontal, usually in the back. And depending on the type of thread that you're using, how it's wound on the spool itself is which one you'll use, and we'll talk about that when we go to thread the machine. Also, you have your bobbin winder, usually right next to the spool pin, and this can move back and forth, just like so. And on here as well, you also have a piece of metal that will be used for threading the machine. So now that we're talking threading the machine, let's go ahead and thread our machine. And I'm just going to use a thread that unrolls horizontally like this. If you happen to have thread that's cross-wound like this, the thread on cross-wound usually likes to come off the top. So that's why if you have a horizontal spool pin, this is good to use for the cross-wound threads. If you don't have a horizontal spool pin and you still want to use cross-wound thread, on my machine I have used it horizontally just like this. I put it right on here and I stick it on there and I let it run. My machine has not had any issues, but when I go to quilt, that's a little bit different. If I'm going to use a cross-wound thread, I'll usually have like a bowl or something I set behind my machine, and I'll stick a hanger or hang something from my ceiling and let the thread loop through above and come into the top, from the top of the machine. So that way it pulls off of the top of the spool. So we're going to just work with regular basic threads here and your thread that comes off sideways. So you have your spool pin, you want to have that extended up, and you want to put your spool right onto that. Now this little metal mechanism has a little neck, and you want to pull this back around. There's like a groove in here, and you just pull your thread through that groove. All right, now I'm going to move you around to the front of the sewing machine, and we're going to finish threading this up from there. So I have my thread and I've pulled it through the top here. And then I'm just going to kind of follow the guides. A lot of machines actually have little arrows. It's hard to see here on my camera, but it's the same color, but they're grooved in here. You'll find arrows that kind of point you the way and show you how your thread needs to actually travel. So I have to take mine underneath of this, which most machines do the same exact thing. There's like this little lip that sticks out here. And then you want to make sure that your needle is in the up position, as far up as you can take it. And you can use either your hand dial, or if you have an automatic machine like I do, or I'm sorry, a computerized machine like I do, you can just hit that button so the needle is all the way up. And in this slot, you'll see a little metal bar here. On the back of that little metal bar is actually a big hook. You can't miss it. Just pull your string around that. That's all you have to do. Make sure it threads down into this groove right here. Once you have it all the way down, I have an automatic, a nice little needle threader that's attached to my machine. Some people have an automatic threader that does the whole thing automatically, puts it right into the needle. Some don't, and you might have to use a needle threader or try and eyeball it through your needle, but that's going to be a little difficult. I find it to be easier if you have a little help from your machine. So I thread it through here. There's a little hook under here. I thread it behind there. And on this is a little hook right here. I'm going to hook my thread underneath that hook. Push this all the way down, and you'll see that these little teeth come forward here around your needle, almost like it's hugging the needle. And then once you have that underneath your little hook here, you want to go ahead and just pull that through. Let that pull your thread through the back if it catches. There we go. And then just pull your thread out. And once your thread is pulled through, you're going to go ahead and just pull it right under your presser foot. Now, you want to see your presser foot here? There's one thing I forgot to mention. When you thread your machine, there's a lever in the back here that can raise and lower your presser foot. This is what holds the fabric down as it's pushing through. You want to make sure that this is in the up position when you're threading your machine, because when it's down, your tension discs are pressing together. And that can make it a little rough on your tension discs when you pull the thread through. So you want to make sure that's up. And so after you thread your needle, there's a little slot on your foot there. If there is, just pull it through that slot. Now we have to put the bobbin in our casing. But we have to wind our bobbin. So technically, you should actually wind up your bobbin before you even thread up your machine so you don't waste your time. But I'm just wanting to show you that part first in case you already had your bobbins wound. So if you do not, we're going to wind some bobbins. A bobbin looks like this. It's either plastic or metal, and some machines have a bobbin casing that pulls out and you just pop the bobbin into. Mine does not. I can just put mine right into the base. The bobbin holder does not remove, the bobbin casing does not pop out of my machine. Yours might, but it's okay. They all wind up the same way. And this is actually, I think, the most fun part of working with a sewing machine. You just kind of get to sit back and let it kind of drive on its own and let it just wind the bobbin. And our machines are actually pretty smart because the way that they wind them is they keep it from getting all tangled up, keeps the tension all nice in them. Now, so once you do that, you want to take your bobbin, and there's a little hole in the top of your bobbins. And you want to take the thread, put it through one of those bobbins, and just hold on to it. And following your machine, because yours might be a little bit different than mine, but on the top there's usually instructions or little arrows or a picture showing you how your thread should be put into this top metal piece here for the bobbin, because you want to have tension when you're winding your bobbin. So most machines pretty much work the same way, where they have a little pin here, and you just want to pull your thread around that and make sure you feel that click in there. And then on the bobbin winder itself, I'll move my thread so you can see it, you will feel, if you turn your bobbin, you'll feel a little groove there, and you want that to be in the groove. Because when it's spinning, you don't want it to kind of lose its grip on the bobbin winder. So once you have that in there, you want to hold your thread just a little bit, and I usually put my machine speed all the way up maximum. And I'll just start it off just a little bit using my foot pedal here, okay? But I have to get this properly wound in here because as I was talking, it came out. But with this you can actually use a lot of speed on. There's no need to really go slow with this. It's kind of fun to just sit back and just watch it unwind and do all it needs to do while you just kind of sit there and and watch your YouTube, and or listen to your music, and you can even eat a sandwich, whatever you want, drink your wine, anything you want. So once you have that, then just line it up just a little bit, and then I usually take a little bit, take my scissors and I'll cut as close as I can to that bobbin, and just cut off of that top string there, and then I just let it go. My foot's on my pedal all the way down, let it go. If you find that your spool shakes a little bit, some spools do, if they do, if your spool moves around a lot, shakes a little bit, you can just hold your finger on it, keep it from doing that. You just want it to stay a little bit tense, that's all, but you don't have to. I mean, I just kind of let mine just go. Wiggles around a little bit. And on the end is a little stopper, so I can let this go until that stopper says, no more, no more. And that's fine. I don't like to overwind my bobbins, though. One, I find that I usually don't need all that amount of thread. I like to, if I'm quilting, that's different, but for normal projects, if I'm just using a color I know I'm not going to use all the time, I'll just wind it almost all the way. So once you have your bobbin wound up, just go ahead and snip your string there, and then your bobbin can now be placed into its casing on your machine. So that's how you wind your bobbin. Very easy. So let's take a look at how we put this into the casing of our machine. So here is my bobbin casing. It sits right at the foot of my machine. Yours might be one of those that you need to take the bobbin casing out, and a lot of times that would be in the front here. You might have a panel in the front that has the bobbin casing here. So either way, they're all going to work the same. You're going to pull your casing out and wind it, or put your bobbin in it, or you're going to do what I do here. And your instructions here, there's pictures that kind of tell you how to kind of drive your thread around your machine. So yours will probably have that as well, and it's pretty simple. Now, the direction that the thread goes in or comes off of your bobbin is crucial, and that will be different for every machine. The last machine, the very first machine I had, actually I had to put it in so the string, or so the thread came off the bottom right of it. However, like the letter Q. On this machine, however, I have to put it in here like the letter P, as in Paul. So I just take that and I wind that around this little path here. I'm following this little path around the bottom of my bobbin, my casing here, and it just kind of goes around this little opening, and then there's a little sharp razor in there that snips it right off. And that's it. Easy enough. And then I put my cover back on. Simple as that. So now that we have our bobbin in place and our machine threaded, we're going to go ahead and pull our bottom thread up to the top. Now, not all machines require you to do this, but most do. Mine does not, but I will show you because yours probably does. And it's actually nice when you do some quilting anyway. When we get into quilting, I will show you how the importance of pulling this bottom thread to the top is. So I'm using my hand dial for this. I could also just do a single stitch with my machine and push down once and pull back up once. Either way is fine. So what you want to do once you make your single stitch, just start pulling on this thread here, and you'll see underneath here that your thread will start to come up from the bottom. And I usually just take my scissors and I usually just pull that right through. So now I have both the bobbin thread and the top thread coming out of my machine. And this is a great way to start your stitching. So I'm going to grab a couple pieces of fabric and I'm going to show you how we're going to stitch down a seam. Alright, so I have two pieces of fabric here and I'm going to place them. Now because I'm using solids, there's no right or wrong side to my fabric. If your fabric has prints, though, there will be an obvious right and wrong side. And when you sew, you generally want to have right sides together. You want the correct sides facing each other. And then I just take my fabric and put it underneath. Now, usually, I do not actually just set my foot down and start stitching. I don't like to do that. I like to have a starter and a finisher to anything that I stitch, just to make sure that there are no weird issues with tension or anything like that. So I'll just take a piece of scrap fabric and I'll stick it into my machine and I'll just kind of let it run a stitch line down my fabric. And not just only does this help you to check the threads to make sure that everything is correct with your tension, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but this will also make sure that you don't have fabric pulling into the foot. or underneath into your feed dogs. That's what pulls your fabric along. There's little teeth under here, and these are called feed dogs. On the back of your machine, you may have a switch that you should have a switch that allows you to raise and lower them. And the only time you would really want them lowered is if you were maybe sewing a button or if you were quilting. Any other time, pretty much, you would just let this run. So with the foot up, so with your feed dogs up. So I take my little starter patch here, and I just let it run through the machine. That's all, just a little starter. And a lot of times I might take a look here and look at the back and just make sure, taking a glimpse, that everything's correct with my stitching and everything looks good. And I use black fabric on that, so it's really tough to see. So that's why I'm using a lighter colored fabric now for our demonstration. I have a black piece here and a blue piece. And I'm just going to let this follow my starter piece. Most seams are at a 1/4 inch when it comes to quilting. And a lot of the projects that we'll be making here on the channel, sometimes we might flip to a 1/2 inch as well. And I believe if you're working with clothing, it's at a 1/2 inch or maybe even longer than that, like 3/4 inch of a seam. So however long you want your seam to be is fine. So I'm not even going to really follow my seam line at this point. I'm just going to stitch just to show you here. Now, I was telling you not to go super fast, right? So my machine here is set at the highest speed. And if I keep it at the highest speed, I might find that I'm going to encounter some tension issues. So I'm going to lower that back down to halfway. And I'm just going to let the machine go. Now, machines are pretty smart. Those feed dogs, they run real good. And they run real straight. So they're going to keep that seam straight. But you got to make sure that your fabric's going in there straight as well. And I'll give you some tips on how to do that. So then once I have my seam down here, I'm just going to take this out. I like to pull out a little bit of thread and leave some length there. And on the side of my machine, I have a little clipper, or I can just use my scissors to clip that thread. So now I have my seam. Now I do see that I have some issues. I'm probably going to have to rethread my machine from it. However, that's the point, right? That's why we're testing this out. But you can see my seam here, and then if these were printed fabrics and there was a right and a wrong side, then you would see that my seam is here. Now my seam got all bunched up here. You can't quite see it that much, but it did get a little bunched up. That just means that my tension did not catch it right. Now, I know a lot of people are afraid of tension on these machines, but don't be. A lot of times it just means you just have to rethread it. It's not even really a tension issue. So that's a big thing. So that's our first stitch. Oh my goodness, guys, if you're following along at home, you just sewed your first seam in your fabric. All right, guys, so let's talk about some issues that we might encounter along the way while we're working with our machines. I was showing you how my seam kind of bunched up a little bit on my fabric here. And all that really means that a lot of times, with my personal experience, I just have to rethread my machine. Sometimes you might have issues where the thread on the bottom might be pulling, or you can almost like stick your finger through the threads underneath, but not on the top. The top looks gorgeous. You flip it over and you see your threads are a jumbled mess. You just have to play with your tension. I like to leave the tension dial on my machine between 4 and 5, generally around 4. If it's thicker, I tend to go with a lower number. Like if I'm doing a thicker quilt, I might lower that tension a little bit, depending. But you always want to just test it out. Always test your fabrics. Cut a little strip off, or even take a scrap fabric and just test your seam or your stitches, and just make sure that that tension is good, and make sure that the threads are nice on both sides. If you're seeing a little bit of thread coming up from the bottom into your top stitches, then that just means your tension is a little too tight. So you just have to go ahead and loosen that up a little bit. So mess around with tension, but don't mess around with it too much. I find that leaving it at 4 is good enough for me, and I don't ever really need to adjust it at all. So you might find the same thing with your machine. Now, if you work with the decorative stitches, that's another animal. With the decorative stitches, you might have to mess with your tension a little bit, because sometimes they require it to be just a little bit tighter or even a little bit looser. So just kind of experiment. Take a scrap fabric and play with all of the decorative stitches. Do a line stitch down your scrap fabric. Keep yourself a little library of stitches. You can create yourself a little fabric book of all of your stitches. You know, get a scrap fabric, plain color, and have a nice contrasting thread to go with it. And just try out all your decorative stitches and number them up, and that way you can see what they look like on your fabric, and you can easily pick, oh, you know, I like that stitch, I'm going to use that one on this in this project. So that's really the basics of your sewing machine and how to thread the machine and making sure everything is good to go. So you made your first seam. Congratulations. If you have any questions, if there's anything that you want me to expand upon, which will probably happen anyway, this is only the first video, but I do have a lot more planned. We're going to talk a lot about stitches and about different threads and things like that. But I think we're going to just have some fun, really, is what it's going to come down to. So next week, we'll work on a little project, and we'll start off with practicing with our sewing machine. We'll do some stitches, try out all different kinds of stuff, and just kind of get comfortable with this new friend of yours. And like I've named mine. You'll get to know Picard very well. I named him Picard because he makes it so. So you can always name your machine as well, if you want. Or not. You can also curse at it. But it seems like a lot of us have machines that we were given as gifts or passed down to us and maybe sitting in our closets and we've never used them. Well, you know what? Now's the time. Don't be so afraid, because we're going to tackle that beast together. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to make some really fun things. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked this episode, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up like button, because that's really helpful to the channels here on YouTube, and hit that bell icon if you want notifications of whenever a new video is posted here at the Seam Stream. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and take care, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.